Hello, Peterson Academy friends. This Dialogos with Gerald was recorded back in March this year, but due to circumstances, it's taken me a while to turn this around and get it published to YouTube. In this session, we discussed the nature of collectivism and whether there is such thing as a collective, and can the collective have rights that the individuals do not. As the nature with political discussions and debates, um, a lot of different viewpoints can converge on this topic, but that leaves a lot of room for equivocation. And so, the first part of this discussion, we spent a lot of time wrestling through definitions, semantics, and trying to pin down a univocal understanding of certain terms. Uh, and it got tense at a few times. However, I feel we did come to a successful resolution where we did come full circle. And it was a very enlightening discussion, a very challenging dialogue that left left me with more questions at the end, more things to contemplate. So I hope you will enjoy this stimulating discussion. One of the goals we've had for Dialogos is not just to discuss things and matters in the realm of abstract philosophy, but to have many more practical dialogos across partisan lines about politics to see if we can come to a shared understanding or just an understanding of one another's perspectives. And so, if this dialogue resonates with you and you would like to participate more in more discussions concerning politics, economics, please reach out to me. We want to have more of these Dialogos topics in our group. Welcome to Peterson Academy Dialogos. Today we have a guest, new person with us, Mr. Gerald. I have been following Gerald on the quad, or more particularly in the various philosophy courses, and have really enjoyed his insights in the comment sections of the lectures. And so we've had a back and forth for several months, and I'm thrilled to have him with us. He's going to lay out some ideas that we're going to explore together today. Caden, will be the lead listener with Todd and Juan as backup listeners. And today, because we are meeting on a Friday night, so our numbers are short, I recruited my brother-in-law Taylor to be the scribe, and he will give his report at the end. All right. Thank you for being here. Gerald, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Caden, and thank you, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you guys here today. I've been looking forward to this now for a couple of weeks, so I'm excited. So a bit about myself. I spent my life in real estate, and for the last 25 years of real estate, I was an instructor, industry instructor. If you were getting licensed or continuing education, and surprise, surprise, the top thing that I taught actually right across Canada for the industry was ethics. And so so that's my background. When Peterson Academy came along, I said, I'm semi-retiring. I'm going back to school. And I've been just pounding it hard with the philosophy, political science, and just loving it. And the discussions with, you fellas and some of the other folks, just been a pleasure. So, and I just started, finishing off the marketing plan. It's going to be hitting the big time soon. A little, I guess you'd call it a podcast called Surrogate Dad, where I give out, it was my daughter's idea. She said, give out dadly advice to people who never had a dad or the opportunity to have dad advice. So I just started Surrogate Dad. I've got a few videos up on YouTube. I'm going to get a couple more, and then I'm going to hit the marketing and actually officially launch it. So there's my little plug. So
Awesome.
dig into the.
I was just going to say it's sad that that's a necessary service, but it's becoming increasingly so.
Is it?
I'm glad you're doing it.
Thank you. It's interesting. I feel, how you get, what's that complex, imposter syndrome? And I'm doing this, I get imposter syndrome, and I'm telling my daughter, because it was her idea, and everybody I talk to says, great idea. And she goes, and I tell her, I feel like an imposter. She goes, you're a dad. So we'll give it a whirl, but it is a good point. You're doing something. So Thanks. Okay, so I'll launch into the questions here or the ideas.
Yeah, hold on yes, just 1 second. Go.
So I'm going to read what I do in the Peterson Academy courses, as probably everybody else does. I go along, something hits me, and I stop and I take some notes. And so these are notes I've been working on. So this will be perfect for today's setting because these are things I haven't worked through completely. So this will be a great back and forth. So there's two sentences here that kind of highlight where I'm going with this. The first one is there is no such thing as a collective. It does not exist. And as such, it most certainly has no rights. And then the second part of this is another set of notes here group rights versus individual rights. Essentially, there is no such thing as group rights. So, kind of the same thing, but I'll read what I've got written down, and that'll be a great launch to where we're going. So, there is no such thing as a collective. It does not exist, and as such, it certainly has no rights. A collective is simply the label applied to a grouping of individuals. Destroy the collective, and all the individuals that make it up are destroyed as well. But if all the individuals decided of their own accord to go their own way, effectively dissolving the collective, the individuals would still exist. So the point I'm getting at there is with the collective, Hegel was saying, Hegel himself, like all your rights come from the collective. And I'm saying, no, that's nonsense. The collective could disappear, but the individual still exists and the rights reside with the individual is kind of where I'm going with that. This one's a little bit longer, but not too much. Well, yeah, it's about 3 times as long. So group rights versus individual rights. Essentially, there's no such thing as group rights. So if we limit an individual right to protect the rights of the group, what we've really done is we've limited the rights of each and every individual making up that group. We have destroyed rights to save them. The rights of the entire group have been diminished. For a group is not an entity, but individuals are entities. And I'll explain this more. If I don't get through it in the notes, I'll explain exactly what I mean by that. The rights of the entire group have been diminished. I read that. If you limit the rights of every individual, and those individuals form a group, you have limited the rights of the group as well. Now, if limiting the rights of one individual can be shown to rightly enhance the rights of every other individual in a group, then we have a justified limitation of rights. I have not yet come across such a situation that I can think of. We can limit the rights of an individual to protect the rights of every other individual in the group, but the group as a whole do not have rights. What right is there that an individual does not possess, but by virtue of being in the company of other individuals, I now possess? So let me read that again, make sure I got it across there. What right is there that we don't have as individuals, but as soon as we connect with other individuals, become a group, we now have? I can't think of any right that would meet that criteria. Collectivists, and this is one of my favorite little sayings here, they pick the fly poop out of the pepper with opposing ideologies. Collectivists will, you see this in capitalism, they'll talk about the contradiction of capitalism. So they'll pick the fly poop out of the pepper with opposing ideologies, but they never quite provide a satisfactory explanation why their ideology is better. There's all the flowery talk about the collective, but the individual is always below the collective. They try to vaguely imply that things better for the collective are better for the individuals. But of course, they can never directly say that because it is patently false and because it would imply the value of the individual, undermining the entire enterprise. So they can never really say that because when they do that, they're implying the worth and the value of that individual. And so that's why they kind of beat around the bushes and always talk flowery language. So talking about picking the fly poop out of the pepper, they always say, look at the contradictions in capitalism. And I say, You guys got a lot more contradictions in collectivist theories than there is in capitalism, and it's been proven out in practice. You know, the old joke, right? This time is going to be different with socialism, and it's already starting out not different, exactly the same, right? So there's my thoughts in that regard that I worked out so far.
Mm. Okay, so rights, you have a problem where you're really struggling and you've gone through your thought process to try and understand how rights can derive, how there can be rights that belong to the collective that don't belong to the individual. And every single time you've gone through that mental test in your mind, you have not been able to find a case.
And much more than that, I haven't been able to think of any right that would accrue to a collective automatically, but not an individual.
Yeah. Could
Like
you walk me through some of your mental thought processes on that and those failures of how the rights of the collective would not transfer to the individual?
Oh yeah, this is easy. We can
Yeah.
well, actually I can't, because there is no right. I haven't been able to determine any right that belongs to a collective.
Mm-hmm.
Any right
that
belongs.
Walk me through how that fails. So let's because you said you ran these tests in your mind.
Okay, well let's pick the easy one. Thou shalt not kill. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you as individual, you cannot go and kill another member of the collective. Well, the first question is, well, wait a minute. Let's stop. We need to define what is a collective, what is the collective, and who are the collective? What is this collective? And all I can come up with is it doesn't exist. It's just a label applied to a bunch of individuals. If one individual leaves and two more come in, and then four more leave and six come in, we've still got this collective here, but it's a different being now. And you know, and it's interesting. I think it was Hegel who also said individuals don't matter, but the collective matters and the state matters, because the state persists and the individuals don't. Well, no, the state does not persist, and no, the collective does not persist. Even if one did last, like say the Rome government lasted 500 years. Well, even that, every government was a different government. You know, every time somebody passed away, there was a new. I'm trying to think of when they were no longer a republic and they became what was it when
Empire.
thank you, and the Caesars took over. Every new Caesar killed an own Caesar. So like there is no real everlasting collective. There is no real everlasting state. That's nonsense. It's all individuals. And so so let's go back to my starting point here, because I tend to go off on tangents here. So we have all these, so we can't really define, I can't find a way to define a collective that says, boom, that's a collective, that's a thing, it's an entity, it exists, it has rights. All I see is a label to all these individuals. And then you go across the street or across to the next country, you know, you take a plane to another country, there's another collective, and it's all these different individuals. So, okay, so now we limit the right of, we say to you, you can't kill another member of the collective. We have to protect, we have to, your right has to be limited to enhance the rights of the others in the collective. But really what we've done is we've limited the rights of every single individual in the collective. I can't kill anybody, but nobody else can either. So nobody's rights have been enhanced by that. Right? Nobody has had their rights enhanced by limiting me. We've limited everybody. Yeah, so we're
interesting. Let's hear from I don't know who had their hand up first, if it was Todd or Juan, but whoever had their hand up first, go first.
I wasn't paying attention, so I don't even know.
Oh, you're already talking. Why don't you go first?
No, I think it was Todd, but I think yeah, but I can go if you want. Like, have to. I don't mind.
You can go. Go ahead. It's fine. I'll wait. Maybe you'll take some of my stuff, which is great because I got a bunch of stuff. So go ahead.
Okay, I don't have much, but one thing that kind of like arose as you were making your way to your argument was, so it's the argument seems to imply that there's not such a thing as a collective, but when we think of, for example, like a nation, say let's take like Canada, for example. Um, the nation itself, it's like an entity that seems to have a will in of itself as well. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
so,
Because
oh, sorry. Go
in
ahead.
this,
I should. Sorry.
so no, it's okay. The reason why I say that it seems to have a will of itself as well is because, in a sense, even though it is the what would you say, the all the pieces are being run by different individuals, the whole nation itself can draft each of the individuals, say for things that the individual have no say on it. So for example, like if there were to be a World War III right now, Canada as an entity would be able to draft whoever is Canadian and tell them like you have to go to war right now. There'll be people knocking at your door, moving other individual entities to draft you out of your and force you to go there. You cannot make a decision independent of the collective in that sense to not go, for example, because you would be judged in accordance to what the nation as a whole, what the will of that nation is. So I actually very strongly agree with you. We should start from the individual first and think about like, okay, what are the responsibilities and what are the rights of the individual? But we cannot completely, in a sense, I think, erase the whole nation of the collective, because it is a reality that the collective does have a say on the individual. So I don't know how can we reconcile those things, like in the sense that I'm not trying to advocate for collectivism or anything like that, but even if we want to try to impose, like, say for example, or like not impose, but like create our legal systems and our morality from an individualist a framework, it is still a reality that the collective has a say on each individual, when it comes to this like international sort of like ways in which the collective is moving. So for example, like, yeah, if there were to be like the biggest example that comes to mind is like the breakout of a war, World War III, for example. um I could decide that I don't want to partake on that war, but that doesn't stop the whole nation to come over to the into my door and knock on my door and be like, you have to, otherwise I'm going to put you in jail, or I'm going to force you to do it, whether you like it or not. You know what I mean? So that sort of thing implies as well. Okay, so that's from one side of the things that I was thinking, but then also there is also a sense in which there's a sense of duty as well. Say, if you do want to actually like do something for your country, for your nation, and you're proud to be, say for example, Canadian or American or something, and then you do agree with how the will of the nation is moving, then there is a sense in which like you also have a duty to that country to also comply with that will. You know what I mean? But at the same sense, you have a duty with that country to also go like want the best for the collective. So it like, if the collective has like an idea that is like not an appropriate one, they are confused and they're going down a wrong path, us as individuals also have the responsibility to tell the truth and like try to reestablish the order for the collective as well. So there's this dynamic between the individual and the collective that I think that completely erasing one side of the equation might run other risks of like us, for example, like downstream of that, of just saying like it's only individualism. Downstream from that, then maybe it can also be that, well, I don't care about like anybody else aside from me, and so I don't have to have any duty towards anybody else. I just have to have a duty for myself. And in that sense, then there's no unity, and in a way which like a whole collective can move towards a future, in which it's like helping each other. Now, I know that there's some arguments that, for example, Ayn Rand like brings forward, that it's like, well, like if we start thinking from the sense of like the self-interest, and then everybody wants to just do self-interest. It's in everybody's self-interest to actually kind of cooperate with each other to a certain degree. And then if everybody wins, like if I want somebody to cooperate with me, I need to also cooperate with them. And then uh, in a system where everybody is like working on self-interest, it might work, but I don't think that in all cases is the problem. I think that maybe downstream from that is like, well, if I can get away with maybe, you know, doing something that completely isolates me from anybody else and have absolutely no interaction with anybody else, and I'm able to just be self-sustainable, then I can completely erase myself from the equation of anybody else but me, and then I can just like do my own thing in isolation from anybody. But the reality is that human beings are um, social animals. We're social animals, so we need each other. Also because also there's this big argument as well that comes from well, cognitive science and psychology and philosophy as well, that the best source of like self-correction it's are each other. So we cannot also complete entirely in isolation, because we run the risk of also not being able to see the whole picture, or not see like areas in which we have certain blind spots. So there's a way in which like the individual and the collective need each other. It's like a reciprocal thing between these two sides of the equation that cannot. I think there could be a case. We could make a case for being careful about like erasing either one of those sides. Because I know that there's like a clear consequences that we have seen have happened from assuming just the collectivist approach that have not been good, but also the opposite could also be bad. Like only assuming the individualist approach can also end up in something very bad downstream. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that one.
Okay. Yeah, so I took a couple notes. When I'm taking notes here, is my keyboard too loud? Is it disrupting?
No, it's good. I didn't hear it. So
Okay. Yeah, and thanks, Juan. These are some things I've actually thought about, most of what you've said. So this is good. I took some notes here. So first thing is, I think you may have unwittingly done some equivocating there, not on purpose. Well, we have to define what we mean by the collective. For example, absolutely, we have families, we have circles of friends, we have societies, we have groups we belong to, we have guys we meet with and do these podcasts, the things and discuss with. To me, that's different than the collective. When I'm talking about the collective, I'm talking about a system of government, a system of how our society, how our nation, how whatever the group is, how we organize ourselves in terms of government, in terms of human rights, the big picture. We're getting at the metaphysical aspects of us as beings, right? So I mean simply that collective. And I apologize, I haven't worked out the exact wording on this, so hopefully I can convey the idea. I'm talking about from a perspective of government and
Like a
individual rights.
national or nationalism, so to speak, in that sense, or
Yeah, like nationalism, socialism, capitalism, the overall system for us, governance system. So that's what I call the collective. But there's certainly lots of little groups that we belong to, but we join groups, we leave groups. This is not a collective in the metaphysical sense that all of humanity and all of our existence is wrapped up. So we do have groups, but groups, again, these are just labels for individuals like us that get together. I'm not saying you're wrong and I'm right. I'm saying my views, right? My thoughts on this. Again, they're not fully developed. These are just thoughts I've had. And so I apologize if it sounds like I don't ever mean to say I'm right and you're wrong. So that's my thoughts on that. You talked about the will of the nation seems to have a will. Permit me to be a Columbo here, but what would seem to be the will of every person in Canada? that we all have together as a collective? What would that will be that all of us agree to and all of us adhere to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there's not really, it's not explicit so much. We're not all, we have different, we certainly have different goals and different wills that we are like executing. But there's like, in a way that it seems like every group has its own type of like purpose, or it's like it's driving each one of the individuals that are member of those groups to move in certain direction. You know what I mean? So for example, in a sense, like the will of a nation, I guess would be to accrue resources and to like generate profit and resources to be able to engage in international cooperation and international like exchanges, to be able to continue to accrue power and avoid other nations from swallowing it. You know what I mean? That's like so what it is like, I think this is this tension always as well from it's interesting that we're talking about like the collective and the individual, because you're absolutely right that there's different groups and there's different levels of this. And so there's a sense in which like every time that we create a group, we have to necessarily exclude other members of other groups. And so each group by definition must have a will that is not necessarily the same will as other groups. For example, insofar, for example, as right now, our group here for these dialogos is to think about like ideas. For example, we're excluding anything that doesn't have to do with this group right now, right? So like if
Yeah.
somebody comes in here and then says, I don't know, playing the violin, and then we'll be like, okay, maybe that's nice, maybe that's good ambience, maybe it fits with our group, but then maybe if then
Juan,
everything.
does that make us a collective?
Yeah, because there's more than one individual working together towards a unified purpose. And so the way that I'm trying to define, I guess, this idea between a, a collective or like a unity of like a group,
No, remember
I
how I'm
guess.
defining collective, though. Remember how I'm defining. I'm getting
Yeah.
right up. Right. Go
I'm
ahead,
going to
Katie.
interject,
So
and then I want to hear from Todd if that's okay, because I want to kind of clarify your definitions here that you define collective, and you kind of associate it with the nation or the government versus our small groups. So this is not a collective, although there might be a collective effervescence that occurs when we get into that unity. Just like you have a effervescence, a sort of oneness, feeling you have with your spouse when you're married, and there is an identity there to that marriage that each participant is now submissive to, or submits themselves to. But the way you're describing the collective for purposes of discussion is the government. Correct, right, Gerald?
I, again, I have to apologize. I do not have a well worked out definition, but a big part of my vision of the collective, a big part of it, huge part of it, is where do rights originate?
Yeah.
That's
I
so.
want to where the rights originate. I want to play on this little idea and see what it has. And then we'll hear from Todd. I'm just trying to bring Juan's definition, his frame, and your frame of reference into to correlate with each other. Juan did say something about World War III in the draft, and I guess what he's kind of getting at is that there is a reality that the nation state, Canada or America in my case, has over your life, and it kind of sucks. And I don't want to go to. I don't want to go. I don't want to go die in the trenches. But what am I going to do? Go to prison because you're drafting me, and they have force. And so, I think it's also, good to note that with your definition of, well, this idea of the state or the government, I'm trying to get back to that. They are a collective body or a entity, you might say, but are they real? Well, they can impose, because we've entered into a social contract with that government, they can impose certain things on us because they have force. Government is also defined by the institution that has the guns, the monopoly on violence.
So then we're arguing for the might makes right, and we all know that's not a valid argument, right?
No, I don't think that is correct, but they are one
You
of the
just said
roles that
force.
they have force, they have the weapons. Because the opposite would be if everyone now has right to force, then you have anarchy. And so part of the role of government is to kind of mediate between different interest groups who want to have their way made, to make sure that they are, you might say, policing them so that not everyone's using force anarchically.
And where does the government get the right to so yeah, government's often been defined as, I forget the exact wording, the exclusive use of force.
Monopoly on violence.
Monopoly.
Monopoly on
That was Ayn Rand.
Where do they get it from? Where do they get that right from? I argue it comes from us as individuals. We grant it to them while they use it appropriately. That's my argument. Right? There's nothing about being a collective that automatically assigns that right to whoever the collective is. Right? That's what I'm arguing, kind of.
Well, so you're arguing that the collective. So let me hear you clearly. You're arguing that the collective. There's nothing about the collective that gives it the right over other people's lives, you might say, or?
No, I'm arguing there's no such thing as a collective.
There's no such thing as a collective.
In that sense. In that metaphysical, rights-bearing sense, where it's this, as Hegel called it, what did he call it? The divine on earth. The state.
The world's soul, yeah.
I think he was making that shit up as he went, quite frankly. And I
apologize. Let me try and come at this from
a let's hear Todd.
Yeah.
So I think you're setting this up and you're defining collective in a way so that it cannot exist, right? I think you're restricting the definition of collective so much beyond what most people think of as a collective that you've set it up so that a collective cannot exist, and that makes the whole discussion about whether a collective has rights irrelevant. Right? If it doesn't exist, it can't have rights, and you set up the definition so that it can't exist.
How
right?
so?
So I think you're defining a collective as it's hard, but the way I'm reading it is, a collective has to be static. Like if you have new people coming in and going out, it's not a collective. Well, no, I mean, my family, I still think is a collective. And when my daughter is born, it's still the same collective. It's my family, right? Or you can talk about the collection of
your rights
U.S. presidents. What's that?
Sorry, I should let you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I don't mind. I mean, I'm trying to think through this because I just feel like the definition of collective is so contrary to what most people normally would think, and almost defined as to make its existence impossible.
Okay, but
and then frankly, if collectives don't exist, then we don't even need to have the discussion about collective rights. It doesn't exist.
It's what most people think. That's an argument from the majority, which is a logical fallacy. That's not the majority think this. That's not a valid reason for it to be that definition. Right?
That's true, but I think if we look up the definition of collective, it's not what yours is.
Okay, but now right. I'm not arguing what the definition of collective is. I'm arguing the collective in the sense of an actual entity that exists and gives out rights to the individual. No, that does not exist. Okay. So no collective. How does a collective get rights that an individual doesn't have? Right? I haven't been able to find.
I mean, again, it doesn't do anything because it doesn't exist by your definition. I mean, I think you're almost conceding that it exists because you keep talking about what the collective can and can't do. There's no reason to talk about that if it doesn't exist, right? You don't ascribe properties to something that doesn't exist.
Well, we have to be able to discuss a thing, and on the spur of the moment, it's hard to find the exact right words that don't allegedly concede that something exists, right? So I guess I'm saying I reject the argument because I'd have to stop and think. All of us would have to stop and think before every sentence and choose our words.
Look, I think the discussion about whether there are collective rights is really interesting. I just don't know how to talk about it if there is no collective by your definition. because I don't even know what we're talking about as a collective. So I can't even think about, well,
think-
what does a collective right mean?
Well,
Well,
that's
See
the
what I'm saying?
thing.
It's just,
Gerald's trying to trace the causative, the causal chain of rights, where the rights derive from, and rights don't, and I
And
don't
that-
think rights come from the collective either. I'm not a,
no, I agree completely. But
yeah.
it come from what? The collective doesn't exist. It doesn't, if it doesn't exist, of course. It
Mhm.
takes away the discussion that I think is really interesting about why rights don't come from the collective. If we're just saying the collective doesn't exist, then obviously not. There's nothing else to say. Nothing else matters. It doesn't exist. How can rights come from something non-existent?
Oh no, that's a false. Sorry, I sound like an ass.
No, go ahead.
I sound like an argument Nazi here. That's a false dichotomy. Either it exists like this, or nothing exists. But there's a lot of real estate in between. Because I do agree with you guys. I do agree that there are groups, right? And once we agree, well, of course there's groups. I mean, of course that's so. But I can define an individual. I can define an individual easily. I can define an individual in such a manner that it's a rights-bearing entity. But as you mentioned, Todd, it's really, really hard to define a collective as a rights-bearing entity. And I think the reason it's hard to define it is it doesn't exist. Go ahead. Sorry.
Can I,
Okay.
can I ask
No,
a question?
Let's
Again,
hear from Scott. Yeah.
go ahead.
So what does your understanding of the collective do for you as an individual with how you operate in life? And why do you prefer this approach over the alternatives that others are talking about?
Oh, that's a cool question. So repeat it one more time, please.
What does your understanding of the collective do for you as an individual with how you operate through life? And why do you prefer this over the other definitions of the collective that people are offering?
Okay. Oh, that's great. So just to be clear, I do not believe there is such a thing as a collective in that sense,
I
right? In,
understand.
in that metaphysical sense.
What does
But
that do for you in life?
yeah, so our different groups in society benefit us greatly. Then now we're going back to Adam Smith. We're going back to the Wealth of Nations. We're going back to political science, where we voluntarily, as human beings, form groups for our own benefits. Adam Smith and, for example, specialization, which leads to guilds and different organizations of people that specialize in a certain thing, and they make themselves better at it. But each one of us, as part of these organizations, each one of us is acting from our own best interests. I get up in the morning and I go to work and I join this union or this guild or this organization because of what it does for me, not what it does for everybody else. Everybody else benefits. That's the whole purpose of specialization in the Wealth of Nations. And it's shown to be almost undeniably true. Everybody benefits, but we're all doing it for our own benefit, really, right? And I can't remember the exact words Adam Smith used, as something to the effect of, we do this for our own benefits, but the group benefits, right? So that's what the group does for me. And what was the second part of the question?
Why do you prefer this understanding over others?
Right. So getting back to the state's monopoly on violence, right? We all willingly do that. We all willingly, but again, in my view, each one of us decides for ourselves. I agree. The state can have a monopoly on violence if the state uses it in accordance with our, and I'm going to introduce another belief of mine here, with our natural rights, because I'm a strong believer in natural rights. And the American Constitution, which I think is the finest constitution on the planet. It's not perfect. No set of words will ever be perfect. Anybody can twist any words around. We see that these days so much, but it's a fine constitution based on natural rights, based on Lockean principles, based on all these fantastic principles. So as long we give the state the monopoly on violence, we create this. I hate to use the word collective. I'm just using it for convenience here because it doesn't exist. sorry. So yeah, I'm all for that. But it all boils back to the rights start from us as the individual, and we voluntarily let the state have temporarily some of our rights, as long as they act properly. To get back to the question about sending me to war, I think it's very arguable that in our Western nations that our governments are far overstepping their authority, and they're only doing it because they have the guns. So those are my thoughts.
So you prefer this understanding of the collective over others because it helps you participate in cooperation more? Is that what you're saying?
Let me confuse this even one step more. You're gonna love this. I believe in socialist principles as a mitigating force to a capitalist economy. The mixed economy. I guess you're familiar with mixed economy. Most nations, most Western are mixed economies. Somebody mentioned also earlier about you take individualism to its logical conclusion, or you take both of them and you get all chaos, right? Capitalism is a great system, but it's not perfect. And it can get out of whack too. And so socialist principles help to mitigate it, but you've really got to keep those socialist principles under a tight wrap in a mixed economy. I would not want to live under an economy where it's socialist economy, but a little bit of capitalism to mitigate that. That's China was like that under Deng Xiaoping did something like that.
So on the right thing with the collective rights, where does your understanding fit in with laws that collectively give to Native Americans? They're like, if you reach this percentage of genetic, this, then you get this. Does that count as a collective?
You have to go to jail here. No comment.
Okay.
Are you talking American, Canadian?
I don't know if Canada. I'm familiar with Native American laws that have to do with that in America.
Because you're in Canada, you don't want to get thrown in jail. So let's just talk about American Native
Americans. I don't know about Canadian laws.
To be honest, I'm not afraid. I'll go to jail if that's what I got to do for my children's generation. Put my ass in jail.
Just talk about a hypothetical race that existed in America, a hypothetical country before another hypothetical population took it over.
Yeah, let's talk about politics.
Hypothetically,
no, I have I think that's a great question. I think
want to answer that question.
Hold on, let me
answer. Okay.
So,
yes, sir.
In the United States, if there was such a hypothetical population, do you know what percentage of your genetics has to be that hypothetical population before you get the rights?
I don't know the exact number, no.
In Canada, it's 1/32. Okay. So if you are 31/32, not this hypothetical population, but 1/32 you are, that's what you are.
Right.
How on earth anybody could justify that is beyond me. But even if it was justifiable, the whole purpose of the Enlightenment, not the whole purpose of it, but one of the big things about the Enlightenment was, we're all individuals. Martin Luther King said it the best, right? Not to be judged by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. And up here in Canada, our government is going completely backwards. And now they're putting everybody into their class groups. This is Socialism 101. Everybody's put into their class groups and rights are being apportioned. And that's just a recipe for disaster, hypothetically speaking.
Nice. Where does that fit into your understanding of collective rights? So you're saying that it does exist, these laws do exist, but they're incorrectly justified by whatever is backing up the logic.
Well, I forget who said it, but an unjust law is no law. Right? But of course, the government has the guns, and sometimes they choose to use them. So I don't know. That's a complicated question.
Well, I guess I would only push back on that because earlier we had accepted that in order for the government to have any power, the individuals give them power. So if the law exists, then the individual gave the government the power for that law to exist. So it's this weird feedback loop.
How feedback loop?
Yeah, so if the government installed the law, we installed the government, therefore we're the cause of the law of this 132nd. Does that make sense?
That might be a circular argument going on there. And it might be also a bit of like, so.
That's the nature of feedback loops. They're circular.
So it's, no, I would reject that one also, because when we as individuals assign, we temporarily assign our rights to the government.
Well, I want to understand what you're rejecting exactly. What are you rejecting exactly? Because we gave. Right. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
We don't assign them the right to create laws that are not laws. We assign them to act on our behalves, just like you have your lawyer act on your behalves. And if they step outside that, the province, or you step aside, they step outside their authority you've given them, right? There's no authority there. So if they create an unjust law, you can't come back to us and say it's our fault. As a society, we have to give somebody the monopoly on violence, right? We have to. So no, I would say no, it doesn't come back to us. I think that's just circular feedback loop. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Can I just comment something
Juan.
real?
Yeah.
I think I have to say I think I agree very much with you, Gerald, in the sense that rights definitely don't come from in a collective sense. Like they come from a sense of like the individual's worth, right? And then from there we grant all of those rights. But there's one sense in which, because I think that side of your argument is very solid and I like it. I think that that's where the focus should be in terms of like thinking about this dynamic between the collective and the individual. But I do think that we need to think through exactly what a collective is. Because say, for example, okay, let's think about the idea of America, for example. America in itself is a collective that has an identity. It grants an identity to every single one of the individuals from that collective. And so like an American does its best to be a good American. You know what I mean? And like
no, I'm starting to disagree with you, but go ahead.
Yes, just one second, because there's a sense in which obviously say I'm going to just put myself in this hypothetical scenario. If I'm an American, I want the best for America. You know what I mean? I cannot be wanting what's best for, say, whatever it is that I'm coming from. I cannot be thinking about like the benefits of any other group outside from being an American, because that's my my main identity, my main commitment to the collective. So if I am in Canada and I am like committing to this like government, for example, I need to want what is best for Canada. So I'm in a sense I'm Canadian before I am, for example, in my particular case, Colombian. I am not living in Colombia. I cannot be, if I'm living in Canada, I need to think about like what's best for Canada. I cannot be thinking about my secondary identity as a Colombian. You know what I mean? Because I am participating within this collective. Now, that doesn't mean that I need to completely agree with the things that I think are actually bad for Canada. You know what I mean? If I care for Canada, and the government and the people are going in a stray way, it is actually my duty as a Canadian as well to say something about it and wake up those people as well. But that is that sense in which, like, for example, there are these realities of the collectives and the realities of groups are very real because, for example, in America, there's a very particular example in which Canada as well, like you said, there's a lot of immigration happening in all of these countries, and the identity of the group is fading away, it's eroding. And so that is very impactful. We cannot completely disagree with the idea that there is a collective and a reality behind it that binds all the people together to walk towards a unified purpose. For example, like in America, in the United States, the big political problem that is happening right now is that this erosion is happening so fast, and that's why American nationalism is igniting itself strongly. Now, I think that is a fair response to what is happening. And I think that is actually very necessary, but it can also end up in certain very extreme expressions downstream. Now, there is a sense in which, like, obviously, like that is important. You need to protect the identity of the place where you are, you know, like if I am in America and I'm committing to the American culture, I cannot say that I am, I don't know, say for example, like the problem with like Israel or you know, this is very complex and like it's very controversial, but think about it in that sense. Like you cannot, a Jewish American that it's in America cannot be thinking putting Israel over America, because it's putting an identity that is not in America over the interest of the Americans. They need to think of themselves first as American, and then think about the other things. You know what I mean? Because otherwise it erodes the identity of the American people. Sorry.
There are plenty of natural-born Americans that hate America and want its destruction. They're mostly white women who are educated, but I don't think your definition holds. Americans can want the destruction of the nation because there are multiple instances of that. But I mean, the person that blew up, threw those bombs in New York was an American citizen.
That's the thing, but they don't think of themselves as American because this sense of the collective that they're supposed to have as an identity of that collective, it's completely eroded. There's no, like it's eroding so much that there's no a unified picture of what Americans are. So like there are Americans themselves that are going against the will of America. You know what I mean? The whole idea is that's why like I said, American nationalism is increasing, because it's like it's obvious, it's a necessary reaction saying like, no, the center of America must hold, and we cannot erode it for like interests that are outside of America. Like why are we defending interests that are outside of the identity of our collective? That cannot happen. And so when that sort of thing starts to happen, yes, there is a necessary response of this thing where, and this idea actually comes from Christianism, is very strong in the symbolism of Christianism as well, where it has a center and there's a periphery to every single system. And so like the center must be protected before you include the periphery, and the things outside of the periphery are like the aliens, or like the stranger. And there's a way in which they're supposed to like, also we're supposed to like behave in accordance with the stranger, but that doesn't mean that the stranger takes the center. You know what I mean? We are to hold the center to be able to hold our values. So that's I think that's this what becomes tricky about trying to think about like, oh, we just dispense from the collective, because there is a sense in which we're bind together wherever it is that we are located ourselves. You know what I mean? So for example, here in Canada, like, I don't think it's. Yes, sorry. So I speak a little bit too much. I talk too much sometimes.
No, those are good points. I want to address those, but I'm just right now. I've been really quiet. I'm kind of absorbing everyone's arguments slowly, but I do want to give some time to Todd and Scott. Their hands are raised. Todd, I know we bypassed you a while ago.
That's okay. I got a little bit. I have multiple questions here. Let me just get the questions out. So I'm going to forget about the definition of collective. I think I've said my piece on that, and I'm just going to move forward into the question of rights. So with regards to rights, I'll get all my questions out, and then you can respond to them. What is the definition of a right? And in your mind, what is the source of rights? And two, I think of a collective, and again, I know you say they don't exist, but to build on what Juan was saying and others are saying, I think of a collective more as a group of people that has a common aim and a common culture. And I think, there is an American culture. There's a traditional American culture that exists. And the third point is, as a collective that may have rights, does a corporation is a legal entity. It is a group of individuals, and it has legal rights. So I would just like your comments on that.
What was your second question, Todd? First one was, what's the definition of a right?
And what's the source?
The source. Thanks. Source is an easy one. In my mind, it's natural law. And that also kind of helps with a definition of a right. And I'm not going to get the exact wording right. And I don't know the exact wording under natural law. but rights are rights that accrue to me by virtue of being a natural being. For example, the right to life. Right?
Does that apply to all animals or just humans?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that one, and I haven't even thought
What
that
about,
one
what
through.
about,
I
what
would
about
say to some
plants?
top of my head, to some degree, every being has a right to life. I think to some degree. How much? I don't know. I haven't worked that through. That's a
I'm
good
just
question. That's
thinking,
a great question.
you know,
We should do that
plants.
next.
What about
Yeah,
cancer
study
cells?
Aristotle.
So
Okay.
so I agree. I also agree with your. So I can get on board with those definitions of collective, right? That's fine. I'm cool with that. There's companies. One of the things I wanted to mention is a big one that is a real tough one. I shouldn't say it's a real tough one to address. I haven't thought it through yet. But what about top quality military units where each one of these guys will die for his brother? You know, each one of them will fight and die for his brother. That's a powerful. There's something powerful there, and I don't, that's not something I've worked through. It's definitely a collective kind of thinking, and I have nothing but admiration for guys, for people that lay down their life for their brother. That's some pop. Anyways, I want to throw that out there as a monkey wrench in my thoughts here. I do agree totally. I'm answering your stuff, Todd, because I think these will be quicker. And actually, I'm going to answer one of yours and Juan's at the same time. Not answer, give my thoughts on. Sorry, the definition of a collective, like a company or groups that we do things together. I'm cool with that. I'm totally cool with that. It's where I have a problem is where someone says, okay, and your human rights come from the collective. Screech. That's where I screech to a halt.
I agree with you completely.
Yeah.
On that. Yeah.
In that sense,
I think rights come from God, but
and I do too as well, but I try to keep that aside. I try to question all my beliefs at all times, right? I believe that strongly. I did a great exercise about 26 years ago. It was quite by accident. I picked up a book simply called Jesus by a fellow by the name of John Dominic Crossan. And he was a revisionist, religious revisionist. And he says, this stuff was nonsense, all about Jesus, and he had nonsense. And I thought, I'm going to study everything I can for religion, against religion, for God, against God, for evolution, for creation. I've read many books. I've studied tons of stuff on this stuff, and the evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of a religious argument for everything so far. I've not yet seen a gotcha argument on the no religion side. Now, I admit it fully. It's hard. How can you prove the non-existence of a being that exists outside of space and time? How do you? So I admit atheists have a hell of a. How do you prove that, right? So I admit they're up against the wall there. But anyways, that's a side point. So I want to come back. I think this might. Here's a thought. So one, we're talking about the collective America, what's good for America, all those things, right? What is America? As an American, I want what's best for America, or as a Canadian, what's best for Canada. Well, first of all, we have to define what exactly is best for America. What's best for Canada? What is America? What is Canada? And I would say unequivocally, this will go back to Aristotelian thought of the highest good. And so we got to remember, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Aristotle, eudaimonia, which we often call happiness, but is really fulfillment or flourishing, and that is the highest good of humanity. Everything we do towards our flourishing. So, and I say that because often someone says, well, you think in individual rights, so therefore there's nothing but an individual, there's no collectives. No, that's a false dichotomy, right? That's because I believe in individual rights doesn't mean I don't go and join groups, part of society, be a good corporate citizen, those kinds of things. No, there's a lot of real estate between the two. So, all right, so I wanted to put those to the side there. So I want what's best for Canada. I want what's best for America. What is that? And I would, to take a long story really short, I would argue that what's best for America is following the American Constitution, which is the primacy and the rights of the individual and a nation conceived in liberty, and where each man is free, each human being is free. And so you talked about the erosion of what America is, and I think the erosion of America is coming directly from the collective, from radical leftist ideology originating, much of it out of China, but this radical leftist ideology that is, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with Marcuse, Antonio Gramsci, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, they talked about this, infiltrating the West and destroying it from within with collectivism. And I see that's what's, I see the collective is destroying what America is. Those are my thoughts on that. So
Let's hear from Scott, and I want to push back on your last statement about the radical left, if that's okay. But I'm going to pin on that.
CCP probably just put a hit on me now.
Yeah.
Do you agree? Sounds like I'm trying to gather like what I am implicitly understanding from your
This is
spot.
fun being on a hot seat.
Yeah. Do you agree with this idea? Follow the rules, but check the results and adapt.
Follow the rules, but check the results and adapt. I'm assuming there's something behind this question. Is there?
I think what I hear moral pluralism. So I hear consequentialism and deontology. I hear judge the outcome, and I hear judge by whether or not the individual follows the rules and their duties. I hear both happening at the same time, rather than
Deontology.
rather than
Wait.
one only happening.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That's a great comment, because I often look at, we'll use those as examples. I often look at consequentialism and non-consequentialism or deontology. And I often wonder why philosophers who are supposed to be history's greatest thinkers put everything into one box and it has to be this way.
I love that question. And I would love to tackle that as a 1-year-old idiot.
There's Scott. We'll
Because-
put Scott in the hot seat for that, right? That'll be
Because
his
you
one.
because you have to pick one, right? If you're going to write some grand idea, you got to pick something.
Maybe
I
somebody
think
could
we
write a
can-
grand idea why a little bit of everyone is just fine. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe
I
you can
love that.
maybe you can grab only the parts that are more aligning with like what's good, and then like dispense with anything that doesn't fit like a model that you want to construct. Maybe.
Well, you
I think
know,
there's
there's
I like
value
moral
in-
pluralism, and I hear a lot of what I like in what you're saying is borrowing a little bit of everything from everywhere, and then coming up with possibly the best outcome.
humanity
result.
and civilization is the most complex thing ever to exist. You know, and human interactions are so complex. I can't think anybody would believe one rule would fit one rule or one system would fit every possible circumstance. We've had infinite number of circumstances in the history of humanity, and we're only starting. We're only just starting. That's my thoughts. I don't know. Maybe maybe there is.
I agree. Yeah.
You know, there's the Robert H. Kane, Professor Robert H. Kane. I think it's him. Kane, and he has a theory called the moral sphere, and I really like this theory. So there's 4 levels of values, and the highest level is the God's eye view. And I can't remember the simplest one. I wish I would have practiced this before today. The simplest one is where you do something just for the pleasure you get out of it. So, for example, eating an ice cream, right? That's pleasurable. I do that. But this is the lowest order of value, and here's why it's the lowest order. What about a demented person who gets value out of torturing people? Well, he's just doing it for the fun he gets out of it, but it's clearly wrong. So he invokes another higher level, and the higher level is, why are you doing it? And he gets these 4 levels building up to the God's eye view. But he talks about the moral sphere. And so, for example, thou shalt not kill. That's a universal. Hey, wait a minute, Gerald. What about in war? Or what about to defend your family? Whoa, okay, you got me there. Now my universal breaks down, but it doesn't break down. Because in his theory of the moral sphere, what he says is, thou shalt not kill. Nobody should kill another human being. The reason you're killing that person, they broke into your home, they broke the moral sphere. Their intent is to harm your family. And so you're not breaking the golden rule by harming that person. You're stopping them from breaking the golden rule. So he calls it, they broke the moral sphere. They're the ones that broke it, crossed the line, right? And so thou shalt not kill is still a universal. Still universal. The only reason you're doing it is because somebody else broke the universal, and you must do it in self-defense to protect your right to exist. So, anyways, that's it's a really neat theory. If you get a chance, look it up. Robert H. Kane. I think it's. I could be wrong on that. I'll check after the meeting, and I'll let you guys know if I'm wrong. But I really like his ideas there, and he's got a lot of good stuff there. Yeah.
I want to push on that idea of moral sphere language and tie it back to what Juan was talking about of identity and back to the language of rights. So I'm not sure you're familiar with Rand's three-part argument: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to be a agentic being, to be a being that can act, you have to be able to preserve, well, the products of one's creation. Because if you just take away someone's property, you pretty much straitjacket their agency or straitjacket their ability as a rational being into the straitjacket. You pretty much done the same thing, because that is what man is meant to do, is to act. And there's this idea of the pursuit of happiness being tied with the Lockean idea of property. But there's an etymological root for property, if I understand this correctly, that property, and we get so triggered when we think that, wives are our property. But there's a deep understanding that what is property is what is proper to me. So why when you have a car, it's your property, and there's like a little psychological knitting that happens between you and your car. When someone beats up your car, you feel like they just committed a sin against you and damaged you.
Because that's a car. That's different, man. That's a car.
Yeah, that's a car. Your house. But what I'm saying is the car, your property. So your spouse, your kids, they are what's proper to you. They consist of your identity. They are in your moral sphere, you might say. Or we use the language, because some of us here are students of John Vervaeke, the agent-arena relationship. That the idea of the individual, it's not proper to conceptualize the individual as just this person, or even cognition as just this thing in your head, but really your sense of identity is here and the in-between, between your head and your body, your head and your family, your head and there's all these iterations, and that makes up your identity. That makes up your soul. If you were to suddenly lose a loved one, that's a piece of your soul. If your mother never existed, you would not be the same. You would not have the same identity. Like people just blinked out of your life, you would not be Gerald. And there's this idea with the resurrection promise in Christianity that's part of you being resurrected is having claim on your identity, which is bound up with everyone who's bound up in Christ. That's a theological discussion. But it's something really cool that when someone trespasses on your moral sphere, you have a right to defend that, because you're not just defending a material thing, you're defending what is proper to you, what consists of your soul, on what has been ensouled with your identity. And so to Juan's language, and there's something really cool here, what Juan is going on about this idea of what it means to be a good American or a good Canadian. And I'm tying that to what you were saying with Adam Smith earlier. And there's a little bit of Lockean language there with Adam Smith concerning, he didn't use the word voluntary association when it comes to group, but Locke uses the word, and he's really big in his letter concerning toleration, of separating church and state, because state, by definition, they're the forceful arm, and you actually can't have a genuine religious participation if someone is forcing you, because there's a foundation or a heavenly principle or something foundation about religion that requires free volition, free assent to participate. If you're being forced to participate in a religious gathering, it's not voluntarily, and so by John Locke's argument, it's not authentic, it's not real. So, with this idea of baked into this idea of voluntary, to do something by voluntary means, Because when you volunteer to do something, you are respecting agency. You are making a choice to participate in that thing. And you are using your reason, your intellect. Back to Genesis, there is a gift, there is one of the roles that Adam has placed upon him, and it's to name all the animals. He has the gift of intelligible order. He has a piece of the logos where he gets to actually distinguish what is an identity, what makes this thing a dog, what makes this thing an animal, what makes this thing a family. There is that power, and that's the gift of what does that is reason, rationality, your free volition. And so you as a father, when you or as a bachelor, when you marry a wife, you find yourself a wife and you get married, till death do us part, you have to say I do. But in that marriage covenant, you are both voluntarily assenting and using your reason, and now you've just created a sort of collective zeitgeist spirit between the two of you, and that's real because, and it's real because it's upheld by both participants voluntarily assenting to it, making it real using their reason. But the government cannot make anything real because the government has to use force. That's why it's an invalid, because it's not. We're getting into religious terrain here, but the government. I'll share. There's this argument by and I'm going to pitch this back to you as kind of like a counter proposal to your proposal. The last lecture on Philosophy of Politics Part 2, the philosopher that was covered was Scruton. And Scruton, really cool. He talks about the conservative impulse, and he uses the word to describe the collective, the state, as you got to have your feelings towards it, and it has to feel good, and you feel this spirit move within you. And he makes this argument, like, and that's one of his arguments for the collective or the state. And he uses this Kantian language of friendship, and you're not to treat the state as a means unto an end. Just like, because I wouldn't treat you. You're supposed to treat the state as an end in itself because it is your identity. I don't agree with this, but the state, yes. The culture, society.
Todd said that?
No, Scruton.
Oh, okay.
Scruton. Scruton, the book, The Meaning of Conservatism. Big name, 2000, yeah.
Oh, I've got the book. I haven't read it yet. He said that?
Yeah, wow. It's a good book. That society is this organic thing. He's using Hegelian language again, and it's your source of identity, and it moves within you, and you feel connected to it. And I wrote some comments in that lecture about my ideas on this, and then he uses in the book. He uses the Kantian language of you don't treat the state as an end, but as a means to an end, and he uses the language of friendship. How you don't treat your friends. If you have a genuine friendship and you love them, you don't treat your friends as an end, but as a means. So I thought about that. I'm like, man, I have a hard time viewing the government as my friend. And I asked the question to the quad, like, you conservatives here, do you actually have this feeling of friendship with the government, with the state? And this question no one really answered, but it was a question I was posing, and someone named Sean answered, and we had a good discussion. And what kind of came up from that was like, well, no, because the government has the monopoly on violence, and it really sours a friendship when someone there is holding a gun to your head and telling you to be my friend, because they're forcing you, and so that by default destroys any possible real relationship because reason isn't respected. And so a collective, to pose back to you, a true collective, if it does exist, it can only exist based on rational assent, and it has to respect reason on every single tier up that, every single interaction. It has to respect reason. It has to respect that level of trust. And one ways, and we like, okay, social contract theory, we assent to the government, and we agree that they have power over us to protect us in war, whatnot, and power. But then the top down, the government can corrupt that when they debase the currency because they want to fund their war, and they know that if they're taxing everyone, the populace is going to revolt. And so instead they debase the currency and cause inflation. So it goes unchecked. It goes unchecked by the populace. We're just blindly trusting, and they're in that sense they're thwarting the mediums of how one identifies with the whole. They're corrupting it. So kind of my free-flowing thoughts to that. I tried to touch on Juan's proposal heavily on that. But what do you make of that, Gerald?
Well, it's interesting because you actually, I don't know if you realize it, you went completely full circle in a beautiful conversation that ended where it began, that kind of reinforced Ayn Rand's position. So, and if you guys, if you know more about Ayn Rand than me, please correct me if I make this wrong here. But I believe she stated, so your right to life is your primary right above all rights, but very, very close behind that is the right to property. And property rights are what drives everything, including you talked about the productivity and producing goods, and having the right to your own property is the same, almost the same as right to life. It's practically the same thing. I think that's kind of like her position.
Yeah.
And so, and then you came around to where, you have government with a gun to your head. Well, how much more, what motivates you more? The right to my own goods or a gun to my head? And so I think it kind of went full circle and pretty much said the whole thing. When you're being forced to do something, it doesn't have anywhere near the effect of doing it because you want to, right? And I think history in the last 150 years since Karl Marx wrote that god-awful Communist Manifesto that caused 150 years of misery and still counting, it's almost undeniable fact that nobody in a socialist society gets, and including the top socialists themselves, gets up in the morning and goes arm in arm with the friends, and we all walk to work together, singing our proletariat songs, show up for work at the exact same time, do the exact same amount of work, get the exact same amount of pay, and go home exactly just as happy. It's like, what's the old saying?
We pretend to work and they pretend to pay us.
Exactly. And the other joke was, about socialism was, with capitalism, man exploits man, but in socialism, it's the other way around. So, but
Yeah.
I love those jokes of the socialist system. And so, when the Soviet Union fell apart, who were the richest billionaires in the world all of a sudden? All the former top socialists. All became the biggest billionaires. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Clearly, from day one, they never believed. They went along with the plan. And that's why I think China will fall. Any socialist system is going to fall eventually. And I'm sure 90% of the people in the CCP, the big shots, I'm sure they're playing the game to stay alive. A friend of mine from China told me that most of them, and I believe this is verified, most of them send their children out of the country, send their money out of the country for their family's best interests. And I believe that's true because I read a report somewhere recently how China's cracking down on CCP members sending their family and their money out of the country. They're cracking down on that.
Yeah.
So it's like the whole thing is a house of cards, which comes all the way back to right to life. My rights accrue to me as an individual. My right to property, as Ayn Rand talked so eloquently about. So you just brought the whole thing. For me, you brought the whole argument full circle.
Yeah. Well, what I was trying to pull out of that argument, though, is a metaphysical claim.
Okay.
And and I'm trying to extract some good out of Heidegger, some good out of about phenomenology and whatnot. And I'm trying to make a metaphysical claim here, and I'm trying to pull it to Ayn Rand, that for something, because Ayn Rand holds as a high principle man's reason, man's intellect, and so does the book of Genesis, especially an Aristotelian reading of scripture, holds this idea of man's agency as the high principle. And for something, by faith, God created the worlds, right? By faith. If you don't understand faith as just this idea of blind belief, but principled action, some form of intellect or logos in there, God created things, we have that power as man. And so for identity to be real, for any relational thing to be authentic, it has to preserve man's, that first principle that Rand talks about, volition, agency. And so the metaphysical claim I'm making here is the collective is only as real as those who are participating in it do so from the heart and mind, do so genuinely with their own intellect, and they're making a rational decision. When it's corrupted, it doesn't exist. It is a delusion. It is a false reality. It is it is hell. The best example I think when I think of Stalin and Lenin and the dictatorships is they're blind to reality. They can't see things because they constructed this world in their own, and they're not properly coupled to reality. They're in their own delusions, and they think they're the hot stuff. The best example I can think of is is C.S. Lewis in The Last Battle, when he has this he saves the world and whatnot, Aslan, and the dwarfs are stuck in their own little, they can't see Aslan who's right there. They've been narrowed in, and they can only their perceptions are so blinded, and because they can't see things for as they really are.
I think Juan wanted to say something there.
Yes, Juan wants to say something. I have more. I'll leave it at that.
That's a great point.
That's the metaphysical claim I'm making about this.
How can a guy
What
so
makes
young
up
get
the
so
stuff of
many
our
books?
reality. Yeah.
I really like that claim, Kaden, actually, because I think this I think this gets at the heart of it. So look, this is what some ideas that I was able to gather in that. Like, what was the author that you mentioned that he was saying that we should treat the state as a means to an end?
Oh, it was
Roger Scruton.
Scruton.
Roger Scruton. As a friend, yeah.
Yeah.
As a friend, well, as a friend, we treat him as an end, wouldn't we?
You treat the state as a means. No. He says Roger Scruton makes the claim that you treat the state or the society, the collective, as the end in itself.
The end in itself.
And my counterclaim is that's weird because my friends don't hold guns to my head. So
yes. So this is wonderful because I think almost the way that you were like framing it as well. You also use this like Kantian language, which I think ties it back to like the categorical imperative, right? So like what is good, right? What is good is actually to be able to treat each other as ends in itself, never to treat each other as a means to an end, right? And so there's this sense in which like, and I think that Christian thinkers have been argued like very strongly recently, but I think across the ages, that reality is actually like a fractal. It's like on a fractal structure. And so these sort of patterns repeat themselves at different levels of reality. So what happens in like an individual, and you were using this language as well on like how you as an individual and like the things that compose you actually act like in an unity, then also you with your family, right? And how like your soul is not just like your own your own individuality, but
and
like
by the way, right there, that's kind of the gold in the crap of Foucault and Derrida when he talks about how power constructs knowledge. He's using a very hermetic suspicion, but it goes back to the blank slate argument that your identity is not just individual but formed by your external environment. And so he says, "Oh, it's capitalism making us all slaves." And and the reason why we have any knowledge is the power around us. And there is some truth to that.
But
it's you're looking at it in a very negative light. So
so like, but I don't think I was trying to argue from like the this Derrida's perspective on like the collective having a say only particularly on the individual, but more in the sense that because there's this like fractal structure, there's a way in which like the categorical imperative not only applies for like the individual, but it applies for like a group, right? For the collective as well. But then you bring in like something that is very wonderful, which is this idea of Rand that like endows the individual with all of this like worth, like with all of this like innate worth, right? And then something that came to mind was this idea that I think we're equivocating between government and identity. So there's like the sense in which like we're understanding collective, we're bouncing between these two words. Like sometimes we use the term identity, sometimes we use the term government. And I think there's two different things. Like as you said appropriately, the government does have a monopoly on the power, but the identity is the other meaning, the other way in which you were framing it, which is wonderful. The identity cannot be forceful. Identity is a voluntary participation into it, and so it's like a way in which love reflects itself, you know. And so like when we are, for example, we have an identity here, for example, in this like particular example, we are participating in the PA Dialogos that that Caden set up, you know. And so the identity that binds us is that we are listeners and participants of the Dialogos right now, right? And this is a voluntary participation. There's nobody forcing us, because then that it kills the identity of a place. Then it's a forceful thing. It's not like it's not voluntary, and because of that it destroys the identity of a place in itself, you know. But there's like a way in which those two terms are intertwined. And I think it goes back to like the same thing that we were talking about, like I, I don't want to like start going into like this very big tangent, but it has to do, because they're two terms that are intertwined to each other, one having a negative aspect and one other having a positive aspect, and there's a possibility of equivocating. We can enter into the whole thing that we were talking about, ambiguity being used for negative purposes. You know what I mean? Being used like we were framing it as if something like dark magic or something like that, it could be framed as, you know what I mean, in the sense that if you create enough confusion about these two terms, then you can always dispense with the idea of identity and always just blame it on government, and then say like, oh, you know, like this collective identity that we may have, that is the same as government. So dispense with government. Government is a bad thing. We cannot trust on government. We cannot trust on the institutions. And then like we descend into like another side of the thing. But also, you know, it's a reality.
Well, but frame it from the other side. If you are coming from, so if you don't have, so this is the conversation that emerged from that post with Sean concerning institutions. Because I'm like, man, I don't feel like I belong to any institutions that I view as a friend, and maybe that's my problem. Well,
no, and I think that's a
institutions of
wonderful
society. Yeah, there are good institutions: the church, art,
thing.
the
Yes,
family, marriage, all these
but
other
what are
things.
they?
Yeah, keep going.
Yes, and what are they? These institutions that are good, actually, like very. We can. What can we identify in them that it's good is that it's a voluntary participation in all of us, and it gives us a sense of identity into it. So like when I go to church, I'm a Catholic or Christian or whatever, Orthodox Christian or whatever, and then I feel a sense of identity into that group, into that collective, and so I try to act in accordance to that collective. For example, like an American wants a good American that wants to be a good American will seek the categorical imperative for the American people, not whatever is good for themselves or whatever is good for their particular group. They will seek what is group for the group, the identity of the group. So American people is not the government. The American people is the identity of the American itself. And so what is good, then it's good. It's cool that you tie it back to Ayn Rand with her notion of naturalist ethics, naturalizing ethics, because she says, look, what's good for an individual, what's good for an identity, an entity, is what makes it flourish. What is good for that thing so that it can thrive, and also food. Philippa food. What's good for these individuals is actually what makes them thrive. And so, like, if you have a good relationship between the identity of a collective and the individual, this will help every individual make the right decision in accordance to the categorical imperative of that identity. And therefore, there wouldn't be any need for coercion at all, because everybody has the best interest of the group in mind, but not from the sense that we understand it right now in this postmodernist lens of like power dynamics, where like, oh, there's always has to be this sort of like thing that is imposing power on the other thing. No, it's from the sense of like, what binds us together is love. That's what binds an identity together is love. And so there's no need for coercion at all. All we need to know is like what is good for all of us, what binds us together as an identity of a collective right now, you know. And then from them we can work out all of the things that are actually good for that collective. But there needs to be this sense of cohesion between the identity. We cannot be thinking about, like, say, if we're the American people and then we think about in terms of like bipartisan relationships, like, oh, conservatives versus liberals, then it's like we're always creating more divisions inside of the identities, or there's identities inside of the identities that are colliding with each other. And then there's like, oh, okay, the conservative group, oh, we have this identity here, oh, but then there's like extremist conservative, national extreme nationalists. There is a Jewish conservatives. There is I don't know, Californian conservatives. There is East Coast conservatives, West Coast, and then there's all this multiplicity of different identities that are fighting with each other. And because they're all fighting for power, they're not thinking about the thing that binds it in love. This is why the argument
and they
for
look
religion.
for love in all the wrong places.
Exactly. This is why the argument for religion is so powerful as well, because it's actually pointing at that. What binds us together? Well, the love that binds us all together. That's what the Christian argument is.
And then,
But
if you don't have love binding you together, so think about this: when someone isn't loved properly, how do they operate in the world? They look for love in all the wrong places. You know, girl has daddy issues. That's kind of the joke. It's kind of a sick joke. But a guy who's never been loved by his mother, he's going to manipulate women narcissistically. They're going to result to power dynamics. Yeah. No, it's a good argument for religion. So definitely, we should. We are getting short on time, and Scott still has his hand up. So I want to. No, Juan, those are really, really good thoughts, Juan. So you and I are going to continue this Dialogos some more.
definitely, we should definitely.
But I want to hear
was
from
awesome.
Scott, and then we'll hear from the Scribe.
What would you need to experience to convince you that the collective does exist and that there are collective rights?
Boom, eh? I would need to see or hear a convincing argument that rights accrue to the collective or come from the collective. I'd need to hear some argument for that.
It would only need to be an argument, or could it be something that happens to you in reality?
I suppose it could be either. If something happened to me in reality that made me stop and go, "Oh wow," you know, I mean, I mentioned to a couple of the guys here before we started, I just finished walking the Camino de Santiago, and it's actually a 1,000-year-old Catholic pilgrimage. And the things that happened to me on that walk, the people I met, the stories I heard, crying with people, the stories tear your heart apart. And really, you hear these stories and you cry and you meet people. I met this one Spanish fellow, gentleman, 81 years old, and we walked together. We were together. We just ended up seeing each other for 3 or 4 days, and we kind of really bonded. And I didn't know him 4 days ago. He didn't know me. Our last night, we ended up at the same albergue in the same room. And the next day, I was walking 20 kilometers. He was walking 24. And so it was going to be our last day together. I'd probably never see him again. He'd get ahead of me. So he said, tomorrow we walk together the whole day. And that really hit me. And then I've been fighting foot problems. And the next day I was having my foot problems again. And it was a hot day. It was a hot day. And he was 81 and he had to go 4 more kilometers than me. And I was holding him up. And I'm like, I said, Javier, you should go ahead of me because I don't want to hold you up and it's hot. I don't want to put you at any risk. And he walked up to me. He looked me in the eye and he said, we walked together the whole day. And I still break out in tears when I think about this. He had nothing to gain. He was sacrificing, putting himself at risk for me with nothing to gain. This guy I just met. So to bring it full circle, it could certainly be something that happened to me because on that journey, the people I met and the stories I heard, and you cry and those events changed a lot of things in how I think, right? Because the next day or the next week, you're out on the road walking alone sometimes all day, and you got a lot of time to think. So yeah, it certainly could be something that happened to me. Things that happen to you are sometimes very powerful. I would just need to hear an argument, and it may sound like my mind is made up, but my mind is never made up. But I would need to hear an argument or have something powerful like that happen to me, that I would stop and say, "Oh my God, by golly, that's a good argument." And I argued with my brother many years ago in Alberta, Canada. Here, they brought in a seatbelt law, and I was against helmet law for motorcycles. No, that was a different one. Seatbelt law for your vehicle, and I was against it, and he was for it. And I'm against it. I want my rights, my freedoms. I'm an adult. I can make my own choices. And he said to me, you get into a car accident, your head goes through the windshield. Now you're in a hospital for 3 months, 6 months. It's going to cost $1 million to take care of you. Who pays for that? And by golly, I thought about that for a week, and I thought, by golly, he's got an argument there. I'm infringing on their rights to keep their money in their pocket by taking my right not to wear a seatbelt. So my mind is always open. And if I heard an argument that made sense, or if something happened to me that made sense, I would absolutely change my mind. Absolutely. I'm a Christian. And I believe in God, and I don't think I'll ever change my mind, but mind is open, always open. In the Bible, I don't know exactly where it says, but seek and you shall find. And I think it's in Peter, Second Peter, it's in Peter somewhere about test all things.
Try the spirits, test the spirits, something like that.
Yeah. So mine's always open. I don't believe I'll ever be changed on that one, but mine's open.
One more question on that. Did you ever used to think otherwise?
Otherwise?
About either. Yeah, did you ever used to think otherwise about this subject?
I was born into a socialist family. My whole family is socialist, except me and my brother. We're the black sheep, so they don't like us. I wasn't socialist. I was big time into that philosophy, and just time and an open mind and thinking changed my mind on that one.
Cool. That's all my questions, man. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. That was
Thanks.
wonderful.
Scott gives great questions. Yeah.
Yeah, great questions. All right, let's hear the Scribe report from Taylor. Thank you, Taylor, for scribing for us tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. I've really enjoyed it. So, all right. So the proposal, it seems, was there is no such thing as a collective, and this collective, if it exists, has no rights. Essentially, there is no such thing as group rights, only individual rights. There seems to be, no circumstance where a right applies to a collective but not an individual. Then we had the questions. Does a collective exist or not? Could not a country be considered a collective? In war, does an individual have a say, or is it the collective? Does not the individual need the collective just as the collective needs the individual? We found a need to define a collective. There were different views on how to define a collective and on whether it exists or not. It appears a collective is not something physical, but it is very metaphysical. It is an identity that is expressed, and expressed like a gene's expressed, not just like outwardly spoken. There was an underpinning understanding hinted at that a collective or government does not disseminate rights. Our natural rights come from the individual, then move to the individuals of the collective or government, under the assumption that they, the individuals in the collective, use these rights responsibly on our behalf. We defined rights as rights that accrue to us by virtue of being. They come from natural law or God. We ought to seek for the highest good. In coming to that good, perhaps we ought to borrow a little from everywhere and come to the highest good from that. We next discussed property, defining it as what is proper to you. If one trespasses on your moral sphere, or what is proper to you, you have the right to defend. An identity is established based on reason and rational assent. This must be respected, otherwise the identity is corrupted and inauthentic. When corrupted, it does not exist. It is hell. Identity cannot be forceful. This is the highest good. What binds an identity together is love. And from the current view, it appears that collective rights don't exist. However, evidence of it, whether from an objective point or subjective point, were given, it could sway the mind.
Oh, thank you, Taylor.
Yeah, thank you.
Good report.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys.
Well, thank you for and thank you listeners for watching this in the future.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Go.
remember, check out the Surrogate Dad podcast on YouTube.